This is TWiT. So I have a new kick I've been thinking about, because we talk a lot. There's a lot of energy spent about artificial intelligence. I think Elon Musk and others have said, oh no, it's the Terminators are coming. And this whole notion that AI, the fear of AI is that it's going to somehow at some point gain consciousness, and it's going to think, we don't need the humans, and it's going to wipe us out, or it's going to turn us into batteries as it did in the Matrix or something like that. And I've read a couple people, most recently Yuval Noah Harari in his 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, who said, no one has ever demonstrated that if you get better at AI, that at some point you'll leap this gap into consciousness.
Yeah.
We don't know where consciousness comes from. There's no evidence that you feed a machine a lot of information, and it becomes a great chess player, and then suddenly it goes, I think I'm going to eat Garry Kasparov for lunch. It doesn't jump to that consciousness thing. We don't know where consciousness comes from. Maybe someday we'll be able to. So I'm going to submit this is my new thing, that consciousness is not the threat of AI. The threat of AI is the humans who use AI. Now, you've been talking about this a little bit on Motherboard. There was a piece in Slate this morning that creeped me out. It turns out license plate reading software has gotten so cheap, and it will work with $100 cameras, that it's being installed everywhere. License plate readers, they give an example of a housing complex where people are using it to make sure that, you're not abusing your rental agreement, that they are everywhere. It's about $100 for the software on a $100 camera. Cities, the city I live in, Petaluma, I noticed was putting up cameras on every traffic light, every street light. Yeah. And I realized they're not valuable if you have to have somebody sitting and watching them. If you've got 400 cameras in a town of 50,000 people, what do you just got 800 officers looking at them? No, you put license plate reading software on it. Yeah. And then if you want to know where Leo was last night, Yeah. Exactly. And this is an example, to me, and Palantir is another one. And I'm really interested that you, Caroline, have been able to break through, because Palantir has been almost a legendarily secret company in Silicon Valley. Yeah. Funded by Peter Thiel. Alex Karp is its secretive CEO. And we knew it was some sort of, well, what is it? I don't know what we knew.
Yeah, I guess the best way to describe it is that it's an aggregator. It takes data from all different types of sources, and it organizes it and is able to find connections in ways that, if you're just a regular human analyst, you might not be able to do it. Or if you're just a person with access to 5 different databases and you're looking to use something from there, that's not actionable, just having all this unstructured data. So that's Palantir's role. It organizes it, and it's able to make charts and sort through very sensitive data very easily, as easy as making a search.
This is what's worrying me about AI. It's not that it's going to become conscious and want to get rid of the humans. It's that there are humans who will be using this. You wrote that 300 California cities, Northern California cities, and I wouldn't be surprised if Petaluma is one of them, are using Palantir. Why did Petaluma put up all those cameras? To gather data. And what are they going to do with the data?
I think the noteworthy thing here... Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No.
Yeah. The noteworthy thing here is that I started this whole thing by sending public information requests to individual cities, and almost all of them came back empty. The only one that came back with information was through the NCRIC, the Northern California Regional Intelligence Center. So even if you're a citizen living in one of these cities and you want to find out about it, there's really no way for you to know. Only by filing a public record request to this regional center do you realize, because here's the thing, police officers can request this type of data from the NCRIC, but there's no paper trail for those individual cities, and there's really no transparency for the citizens that are actually living there.
So this is run through the Department of Homeland Security. Do they say it's to cut down on terrorism?
Right. So on their website, they claim that most of their efforts are focused on major drug operations and terrorism operations. But at the same time, there's they will pretty much investigate anything that a local police department requests help with. And this could be, I mean, literally any type of crime. It could be a robbery. It could be a domestic assault. It could be really any type of investigation that a local police department is operating. So this isn't just a let's catch people trying to commit like a major act of terrorism. This is, local operations. And this is, they have a massive amount of data on the people that are living in those areas.
On the one hand, I would say, oh, that's good. We're going to be a safer city in Petaluma. By the way, our county is one of the 14 participating Northern California counties in NC.
Yep.
RIC.
There it is.
It's going to be safer. It's going to be safer here.
I don't know. I think that this is, it sort of reminds me about the arguments that people make with respect to privacy. Like, oh, I have nothing to hide, so I shouldn't have any reason to worry about this,
No, I don't buy that one. Yeah.
I mean,
if you have nothing to hide, leave the bathroom door open.
I've tried that argument. People don't like that.
There's reason. It's not that you have something to hide. It's not that you're a criminal. It's just that we deserve to live privately.
The risk here is the slippery slope. You mentioned that, why are they installing these cameras in Petaluma? And it doesn't matter why. Once they have the cameras, they can later decide, oh, hey, we have all these cameras. Why don't we do X, Y, Z? So it's really the infrastructure is just another step in a direction. I feel like
we're sliding down this slope.
Well, here's another example. I just wrote a piece for Fast Company about emotion technology in cars, where cars will be able to read your emotions, understand what your mindset is, understand what's happening in the car. This is part of the, self-driving cars are like supercomputers on wheels with all these sensors pointing outward. What we're not talking enough about is the sensors pointing inward at the drivers and everybody else. But what's interesting is that Fictiva is in the lead with this technology of being able to read emotions of drivers, and they're not doing it by installing cameras in cars. They're using the cameras already installed in cars, and they're just tapping into that feed. It's like after the fact kind of an idea where it's like, well, these high-end cars have cameras. Why don't we just read people's emotions with them? And so this is what's
why do they want the emotions? I mean, I can understand for self-driving vehicles, it's important to know what that other driver is going to do. That doesn't bother me.
Well, the
humans are the big problem with self-driving vehicles.
Well, the biggest thing is this is going to go online before they're fully self-driving. But most urgently, Europe has enacted legislation saying that by 2021, all cars sold in Europe will have to have basic reading function. They have to tell whether the driver's falling asleep, whether the driver's drunk.
Yeah.
This is a
Cadillac just put that in their CTS for their autopilot feature.
Yes,
because as you know, same with Tesla, you got to keep your hand on the wheel, and you have to keep your eyes on the road. It used to be that it was enough to have your hand on the wheel, but Cadillac actually has a camera that sees where you're looking, so that if you look down or away from the road, while the autopilot's on, it actually vibrates your seat and then eventually disengages it. To trick it, I had to cover my eyes, but I was too scared to
driving?
Well, that was the thing. I was too scared to actually do that, so I did like this. And I had peered through my fingers, and it did.
But if you wear sunglasses.
Yeah, but exactly. I mean, it does. It's looking at you driving.
Well, the best thing.
And if they were able to get that, and I guess with OnStar, they probably are getting that information.
But I love that technology because you can be able to look at a store and say, is that open? And they'll know what you're looking at, and it'll say, oh, the so-and-so Starbucks is not open right now.
So, Caroline, you filed a public records request and got the Palantir user manual for cops.
Right. So
wow.
It seems like, this was a specific user manual that seemed to be designed for cops that were operating in like the West, North California area. And full disclosure, the manual was almost unreadable. It took me several hours to be able to parse all of this through.
Because of jargon?
Because of jargon, because it was just poorly organized. It was poorly worded.
Oh, that's encouraging.
They did not define any of the terms. They just sort of said that the way it was organized was, here's how you make a search. And then they sort of introduced different charting functions.
By the way, this is confidential and proprietary, not for distribution. So please close your eyes.
Another thing boomers say, in my day, we used to go through dumpsters to find that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
Well, so searching for records in Palantir. Start in the graph application. This is the worst. This manual, you're right, Caroline. This is horrible.
It is like unreadable.
Click the gear icon.
Extremely,
oh my God.
Right. I think it's the best way to describe it is in terms of what you can do and what information that you're starting with. If you're starting with just a name, you can get, I mean, if they have it in their data systems, if they have it in police record management systems, if they have it through other types of private data that they obtain, things that could have access to people's email addresses or bank account numbers, really sensitive information like that. I mean, this is all pulled instantly just from a simple name search.
And if you know somebody's license plate, and you use this example in your article,
Right.
you can know where they, because of license plate readers and cameras everywhere, you can know pretty much everywhere somebody's been and when
Right.
for any time period.
Right. So basically you set the radius and you say you're looking for a particular license plate number that's traveled in like, I don't know, let's say 100-mile radius or more. And then you can set a date range if you want. And since they have timestamps and they have location stamps, you can get all of that information. And then they also have a picture of the car and the license plate itself. So all of this information is stored just by searching a license plate number.
With a name, this is, I mean, we've all seen this
Right.
on TV, on NCIS and stuff, but really this is even much better than anything. With a name, you can get a person's email address, phone number, current and previous addresses, bank accounts, social security numbers, business relationships, family relationships, license information, height, weight, eye color. If it's in an agency's database, you can get it. So that's what Palantir is doing. Do they talk about the sources of this information? Are they getting it, some of it obviously from DMV, Department of Motor
Right.
Vehicles? Is it all government agencies? Is it Google and Facebook?
See, the NCRIC specifically, it's a fusion center. So they would use Palantir to take the different police, like local police records. So this would be like crime, arrest, etc. data. And Palantir also says that they get data really vaguely from government and federal agencies. So this could be where you're getting information about like license plate data, for instance, where you could get information about like birthday, whether you're married, whether you have a business logged in your name, that kind of thing.
So
In
some of
terms
it's public
email
records.
addresses-
Yeah.
Right, some of it's public records. In terms of email addresses or bank account records, I mean, that would be something that would have to be acquired privately in most situations. And I
Is
mean,
there
in
any?
terms
Do we have
of-
any evidence that they, for instance, in their manual, they show you examples of different databases
Right.
you can search, including
Right.
ALPR is automatic license plate readers. You could do LAPD, LASD, border crossing vehicle query, DMV vehicle query, national license plate reader vehicle query, and that's just a portion of it. I imagine this would scroll down quite a way.
Yeah. It's an incomplete list, and it's also with only a sample search.
Right.
A lot of the examples that they had, you could see that the search query was Palantir, and then they had like example profiles that were named things like John Bad Guy Smith. But still, you're
Bad
right.
guy's my
It tells you
middle
there,
name.
yeah. You can see on the right, if you choose a particular profile, like let's say you search John Bad Guy Smith and there's 10 people in the area with that same name, you can click on one of them and you can see the specific details that distinguish him from the other John Bad Guy Smiths in the area.
And by the way,
and
for you at
right.
home, if there's an area with 10 bad guy Smiths there, don't go to that area.
Stay away.
It's a
Yeah,
bad
no.
guy area.
Yeah.
Very dangerous.
I like the icons they use for John.
They're
Bad Guy.
riveting.
I think that's the Hamburglar. I'm sorry, but I think that's the Hamburglar.
So Leo, you should subscribe to this because you always talk to the audience and find
I
out
would
who's coming.
love
You would
to get
know
this
before they even
information.
got here who was coming.
So
And did you know the email address downwiththeus.org?
say again.
That's the downwiththeus.org. That's the email
Down
domain.
with the U.S.
Oh yeah, JBG01 at downwiththeus.org, because as you know,
Wow.
any malefactor you know doesn't like the America that we know. I'm scared. Now let me ask you, because this came out a couple of days ago. Was there any reaction to your article?
Palantir emailed me once and said, "Why did you say that we didn't respond to multiple requests for comment?" And I said, "Because you didn't." That's pretty much the only thing that I've heard from Palantir. In terms of the response, I mean, I guess what sort of surprised me is that I generally had an understanding of sort of how Palantir worked, but in terms of getting the visuals and in terms of seeing the actual manual, it seems like that had an effect on people, because it's one thing to hear that there's like this secret omnipotent data company that's operating in the shadows with regional level governments and investigative agencies, but it's another one to see that you can just search your name and find out virtually everything about yourself. So yeah.
And this is accessible to any law enforcement agency in Northern California, pretty much. It's only law enforcement though, right?
Right. So it would be law enforcement, and any local police department within those counties would be able to tap into those resources.
Do you know who decides that that's who gets to see it, or if anyone is in a position to make an exception to that? Like, for example, mall cops maybe, or
I hope Paul Bart cannot get this.
Mall cops aren't they usually private security forces?
Yeah.
Right?
No private security forces.
My point is this a matter of law, or is this company policy that they decide who gets to see it and who doesn't?
Right. So I think that's one important thing to keep in mind, is that, Palantir is the infrastructure, but exactly how it gets used, that's all in the hands of the regional intelligence agency. What's important is how the data that would not have been actionable is made actionable. And it's put into the hands of
without
just
a warrant.
Other people. Right. Well, in terms of, I don't really get into the article in terms of like, you do have to enter, for instance, like a case number in order to make a search in the ALPR database. And in terms of the people search, at least in that version of it, it's an open field. So when you're saying the reason for your search, it seems like you can just type in words and that'll be accepted.
Type the reason for the search in the search purpose field. This could be a case number or a suspect name.
Right.
Or I'm just bored. I'm sitting here. I thought I'd find out what my ex is up to.
This is kind of timely because this is what ICE is using this weekend to track down undocumented immigrants and arrest them and deport them. The big issue for me, and I have to say, on the one hand, you want law enforcement to have good tools protected by courts and warrants, but you also want to have some oversight in the data. And the big concern for me is this is a private company. Data sources may be corrupt, may be inaccurate.
Insecure.
We know face recognition is often used in these cases. We know that's often full of false positives.
Like the NCRIC does have access to facial recognition. This was I believe it was in Oakland. The head of the Oakland Police Department submitted a letter to the town because they're going to be voting on whether or not to ban facial recognition, I think on the 16th. And they said, based on this ban, we wouldn't be able to access the facial recognition through the NCRIC. So I think what's important to remember here is that this data can be combined with all different other types of databases as well. And for instance, one of the documents that I got back was how to use Palantir with Thomson Reuters Clear, which is similarly a giant database tool for police. And I think that what you were getting at before is really important to keep in mind, that, the way that you act on data is only as good as the data itself. And, we know that the state of policing in this country isn't perfect. So, I think the important thing to keep in mind is how this could be used against marginalized populations. And what we're seeing with the ICE raids, that's pretty much a worst case scenario.
I'm looking at your table of where this data comes from. And
So I think it's important to note that this is through the DOJ, and this is in general how fusion centers work, because Palantir itself is incredibly vague about exactly.
They may be getting it from additional sources, but this one includes amusement parks, cruise lines, hotels, motels,
gaming industry, sports authority, securities firm,
gamers beware,
ISPs, email providers, daycare centers, mental health records, physician-patient records,
veterinary
records.
It says veterinary.
It knows all about your dog.
Spaniel.
So this is a very broad net. Now, this is the DOJ, but this is their guidelines.
Right. And this is Right. So
The
NCRIC
Palantir, I would bet, because it's a private business, goes beyond this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what's important to note, the NCRIC, this is a DHS entity, and if you have some sort of like subpoena or you can request certain types of data from these private agencies, then this automatically can get pulled into Palantir, which organizes the data in a way that perhaps it would not have been able to have been used before.
See, sometimes people say, oh, it's public data, big deal. But we've seen already in many ways how public data is changed by companies like Palantir. Every time you buy or sell a house, it's recorded at the county seat and in a big book. And basically, you'd have to go to the county building to find out who lives at that address. But now, because so many data companies find this valuable, they send people down to county seats. They record all this. They put it in a database.
You know who else finds this valuable? Russia, when they're trying to assassinate a political dissident, or China, when they want to track. I mean, what are the chances that this is not a target for hacking by
oh my God, yeah,
the Chinese government and the Russian government? The chances are zero. Either they're trying and failing, or they're trying and succeeding to get this access so they can track their dissidents. It's a real problem.
Yeah. I think my major concern here is how this is going to be used by police departments against like bodies that are already at risk. In particular, like people of color living in these regions. It's only, I think, like I said earlier, it's investigations are only as good as the data that's informing them. And, for instance, I wrote an article a couple months ago about police departments that were using Predpol, which is a predictive policing software. And dozens of police departments around the country were using this, and there was no disclosure at all publicly about this. And what it claims to do is take crime records, crimes that were reported or crimes that were acted upon, and put it into this database and basically tell police, go back and look at those places. So obviously the question that you have to be asking there is how good are those crime report records? Obviously not every crime gets reported, and the types of crimes that are prosecuted or like investigated by police, that's going to vary place by place, and there's going to be individual bias that comes into play there. So there's a lot of like systemic factors that plays into the way that this data is used. And I think, Predpol, that's another good example. And that's been combined with Palantir in places like Los Angeles. Predpol and Palantir have been used simultaneously at the same time. That's a huge amount of power put in the hands of police that at times have a contentious relationship with their citizens, and, those underlying problems aren't being addressed. And at the same time, we have these like amplifying forces that are making it easier and easier to do these super powered investigations in a way that we've never, ever seen before.
Wait till AI is applied. We were talking about the power of AI in the hands of various people, but you could turn this data loose with the right kind of AI to essentially do AI enhanced fishing expeditions and just hand you a list of all the crimes. I guarantee you they're
doing that right now inside Palantir. I guarantee you that's the most valuable thing. Data. We now know data is hugely valuable, and that the difference is that by connecting data from a disparate variety of sources, you can infer connections that you couldn't see before. And that is, to me, that I don't know if this makes us safer. I don't feel like it does make us safer. I'm all for police having the tools they need to track down criminals. But I don't think this makes us safer in the long run.
Every time there's advances in technology, political and police authorities always use those advances to change the balance of power between the citizens and themselves. And so I've always argued for, if they can track us, we should be able to track them. If they can record us, we should be able to record them. If there's a video camera in an interrogation room, you should also have a video camera.
There is a disparity in power that is,
yes,
you can't, I don't care if you can record everything.
But it's growing because of technology, and that's not right. We should always push back, and, technology is good, but not when the technology, when one side of the equation has a monopoly. Yeah. Yes, police want to do their jobs. They want to fight crime. We want them to fight crime. We want less crime. All of that stuff, that's all true. But every thing like policing has to be balanced against other considerations.
That's why we have a constitution.
Exactly. And that's why we have rights, and that's why we have all that stuff. But if it's being circumvented through technology that nobody's really paying attention to, that's a problem.